Hello, I'm Kara Tessina Olic, Associate Director of Collections and Discovery at the Getty Research Institute. Thank you for joining us. At the Getty, we inspire human connection and mutual understanding through art. The idea to inspire through visual culture is one of the hallmarks of the Johnson Publishing Company archive. The archive presents nearly 80 years of how people of African descent changed this nation, our democracy, and the world, and it celebrates the beauty of Blackness in many forms. As we work with our co-steward, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, to make this collection accessible, we want to thank the Ford, MacArthur, and Mellon Foundations, the Smithsonian Institution, and everyone in partnership with the Getty for the invaluable commitment to preserving the significant collection of American and global history. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Backstage, an unfurling of the Johnson Publishing Company Beauty and Fashion. Curated by our managing archivist and co-founder of the Blackivist, Stephen D. Booth, today's webinar is the first in Stephen's series about the Johnson Publishing Company, exploring themes of liberation and identity formation through the lens of fashion and beauty, and the critical role of archives in cultural preservation. Please join me in welcoming our discussants. Photographer, writer, and Getty archivist Skyla S. Hearn, founder of the Black Beauty Archive and archivist Camille Lawrence, and founder of the Black Fashion Archive and the Fashion and Race Syllabus, historian Dr. Rikki Byrd. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Olic. I am elated to be having this timely conversation with Camille Lawrence, who is an archivist, art historian, beauty practitioner, and founder of Black Beauty Archive, and Dr. Rikki Byrd. Dr. Byrd is a professor of visual culture studies at the University of Texas at Austin, founder of the Black Fashion Archive, and co-founder of the Fashion and Race Syllabus. Today, we will bestow homage onto Eunice Walker Johnson, co-founder of Johnson Publishing Company, philanthropist, education advocate, and highly noted as the Ebony Fashion Fair director and producer. As historians and archivists, we place a significant emphasis on the importance of being grounded in evidence. Being is that the roles of aesthetics and the significance of Black beauty, coupled with historical evidence, is undoubtedly at the core of our focal topics. It is imperative to share how the Johnson Publishing Company has served and provided enlightenment in the Black community and beyond. For so many, the publications produced by the Johnson Publishing Company for nearly 80 years, from the 1940s through the 2000s, served not only as visual resources, but also provided foundational education into historic and contemporary events, social and cultural happenings, artistic and political endeavors, therapeutic outlets for writers and readers, as well as gave outlets of just something to get into on a weekly basis. From the most popularly known accessible magazines, such as Ebony and JET, but also from Negro Digest, Tan Confessions, Tan, Hue, Copper Romance, Beauty Salon, Ebony Africa, Black Stars, Ebony Junior, Black World, Ebony Man, and Ebony South Africa. I would also like to share that we are intentionally having this inaugural program during the month of November in honor of the fact that most publications started in the month of November. As a co-founder, Eunice Walker Johnson's contributions stand as exemplary prototypes for shaping and transforming the fashion industry and empowerment in the Black community in terms of how Black people control the narratives of how we aim to be represented, by whom, and according to our own terms. By implementing innovative methods, establishing new talents, increasing the number of Black professionals in the fashion industry from models, stylists, writers, commentators, photographers, and so on, to financially supporting students at historically Black colleges and universities and other organizations. Eunice was a force to be reckoned with. Ebony Fashion Fair was spearheaded with an editorial in the Ebony December 1945 issue written by Eunice. Yes, to creating and sharing documentation en masse. Then, in 1958, Ebony Fashion Fair as a runway show was established at Dillard University and had a remarkable, successful run for over 50 years. Are you getting goosebumps? Because y'all, I'm tingling. Art-wise, fashion coupled with photography is my jam. Okay, back to Eunice Walker Johnson. By the mid 1960s, Johnson was not only on the front row, but became the largest buyer of haute couture in the world, purchasing some 200 garments a year from fashion luminaries, including Dior, Saint Laurent, Lacroix, and more. Personally purchasing more than an estimated 8,000 garments and spent 1 to 1.5 million per year on designer clothes. By 1973, she went on to launch Fashion Fair Cosmetics to address the lack of suitable makeup for darker skin tones, which became available in department stores across the world, including here in Chicago at Marshall Fields and Company and the like. Eunice holistically changed the color of fashion forever. As a native Chicagoan who lived in the Bronzeville neighborhood, like John H. Johnson and his mother after they migrated here from Arkansas, some of my magical JPC moments began with perusing the pages of Ebony and Jet magazines, thirstfully cutting out beautiful people dressed impeccably to add to my collages of clothes that inspired my designs and desires to be a designer, merchandiser, and boutique owner. All seeds planted by my parents, my mother as a trained tailor and couturier, and my father, who was an antique collector and dashingly handsome, well-dressed man. So, yes, my passion for living my own history through the ongoing recalling and retelling of the Black aesthetics of cool, beauty, and fashion is deeply personal and professional in how I address the magnitude and care of the preservation of Black historical materials. I am sure we all, whether we realize it or not, have been influenced, impacted, and inspired in some form from the contributions that were shared through the Johnson Publishing Company magazines. For us, Camille, Rikki, and myself, some of our earliest, younger self magical moments, which have grown with us over the years and continue to flourish, has been and will be contextualized through our work as archivists, scholars, historians, and practitioners who are not only forging paths into the future, but upholding the past by creating our own as well as continuing in the rich legacy of the Johnson Publishing Company, which is exemplified in the evidence provided throughout the Johnson Publishing Company archive. Because we're curious, I think we are always interested in origin stories. Rikki and Camille, let's start our discussion with you sharing the influences that led you into this work. Which are some of your favorite or most treasured moments connected to the Johnson Publishing Company publications and why?
Thank you so much, Skyla, for that incredible introduction and grounding us in this rich repository of Johnson Publishing Company, and turning our focus and attention to beauty and fashion. where many of us, I think, learned about Black fashion designers for the first time, where we learned about the Ebony Fashion Fair and that there were all of these Black models who were adorned in beautiful clothes from around the world. And thank you also for sharing your personal reflection and relationship to fashion, because that's my origin story. I am very grateful to have a maternal lineage that hails from Little Rock, Arkansas. I was the first person in that lineage to not be born in the South. My maternal grandparents, they migrated to St. Louis from Little Rock in the 1960s when my mother was an infant. But I would spend summers in Little Rock with my great grandmother. And my great grandmother was a quilter. So that's the first time that I start really engaging and learning about Black women's relationship to textiles and Black women's relationship to style, right? And making and craft. My grandmother, she could sew, she could crochet, she could knit, she could do all these things. She could hem my clothes. She just made everything look beautiful. And my mother is a fashion designer in St. Louis, which is how Skyla and I know each other. I'm so grateful. Skyla is a big supporter of my mother's work, and we're so thankful for her. And so that's kind of been my story. That was my introduction. And I watched these women throughout my life place value on materials and objects that often aren't seen in the mainstream as valuable. They're seen as kind of discarded items. They're seen as unimportant. And I just watched the women in my life take things, take dish towels and scraps of fabric and make the most beautiful things. Now, unfortunately, I did not get the knack for making. That did not come through my limbs and my bones. But what I did pick up is their love for shopping, one, and also their love for Ebony and Jet magazine. And one thing that always makes me smile is that a lot of people's earliest memories of Ebony and Jet is that it was sitting on the coffee table at an aunt's house or a grandmother's house or a mother's house. And that's kind of the first moments where we start to see ourselves, right? We see ourselves in politics, we see ourselves in art, and we see ourselves in fashion and beauty. And watching the women in my life combine their own skill sets and their love for these publications really set me on the path. And it told me, you know, this is the story, these are the stories that I want to tell. I want to make sure that women like my great grandmother are documented in the record, right? I want to make sure that they are part of the canon. And so I set out doing that first through journalism, inspired by people like Andre Leon Talley, who many of us really know from working at Vogue, but was on the masthead of Ebony magazine, which we should always remember and call out. And then I followed that up with research and teaching, and then added curating to my toolbox. And so Black Fashion Archive brings all of that together and kind of curating this open, free resource where people can go learn about these tidbits of information, hopefully pick that information and carry it on throughout their own respective interests and projects. And I've been continuously inspired that it's exceeded my intentions and expectations as a project. I've had family members reach out to me, seeing the images on Black Fashion Archive and saying like, oh, we're trying to find out more about our family member who worked in fashion, or publications reaching out about images that I found. A big part of Black Fashion Archive too is really honoring the archivists who are doing the work across several archives, right, to ensure that fashion is a part of the canon across disciplines. And so I'm really grateful to be here. I'm grateful that the Getty is doing this incredible work of honoring this collection, and excited for our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Rikki and Skyla and everyone at the Getty Institute for bringing us together in community today and holding space for us to lift this up and have this really important conversation. Similar to Skyla and Rikki, I too first came in contact with the Johnson Publishing Company as a small child. I was blessed to grow up in New York within an African-American and Bayesian family who really honored music and art, and especially beauty and fashion. And so when my nana and my mom were going to their beauty appointments at the salon, I was tagging along right with them. And even though we had to leave our Ebony and Jets on the living room tables, when we got to the salon, they were there as well, stacked up high. And so as they got their beauty practices and their hair curled and pressed and all the things, I was sitting there going through piles and piles and stacks of Jet and Ebony magazines. But it was clear to me, even in watching their relationship with the materials, that There was a level of intention in their beauty rituals, and I understood early on how powerful beauty practitioners were in community. And so beyond high school, I fell deep in love with beauty and I started taking it really seriously. So I pursued art history in undergrad, but being a professional makeup artist allowed me to sustain myself through my degree and through my career in undergrad. And I understood quickly in studying art history the power of images and what was really being articulated subtly and directly to viewers, especially in our communities. And so working as a makeup artist, my process was always a little bit more difficult, right? Because in a lot of mainstream resources, we did not have a plethora of range of depth of materials that I could pull from to build mood boards and treatments for my clientele when they're doing commercials and video shoots. And that became a bit disheartening. You know, I naturally had a visual archive of portraits in the 16th to 20th century, but I wanted to have deeper access. And social media at the time wasn't allowing me to search by decades or beauty trends or artist names. And even within hashtags, unfortunately, there is some suppression of Black artists in digital spaces. And so when the pandemic began in March, I went back to my roots. I sat down in my living room, I pulled out those Ebony and Jet magazines, and I started building mood boards and inspiration from there. And that really led me to creating Black Beauty Archive, where our mission is to archive and preserve the history of Black beauty culture and really honor and uplift the role of beauty practitioners in community, not only as creators of visual culture, but historians, therapists, and memory workers themselves. And so when we started, we had only maybe 14 objects, and now we've grown to over 3,500 physical objects. And a lot of our practice is really grounded in African traditions around oral tradition, preserving those ritual practices, and preserving the physical outputs of what we create as folks in visual culture. I very much so honor and do see beauty as performance art, and I have always built looks around my clients in uplifting their garment of choice and centering that face. And so fashion for me is really the foundation, and beauty is almost like the garnish on top to really complete a stunning look. And with that being said, I think this is a perfect segue into us learning more about Rikki's work and role in fashion and how fashion and beauty are in conversation with each other.
Thank you so much, Camille, and love hearing about Black beauty as a part of memory work too. I think that's really incredible and really brings us back to the topic of this conversation. And yeah, and bringing in fashion as well. I think one thing in my years of engaging Ebony and Jet magazine, a couple of reflections have like come to the surface, maybe in the past year or so. And one is like how, I mean, it seems stated, but I still really reflect on the fact that like, wow, like Ebony Jet, all of these publications under Johnson Publishing is an encyclopedia, right? Like it's a reference that we are so lucky to have. Anytime I'm starting a project about anything Black fashion related, I go to Ebony and Jet first because what I have learned in my research is they were the first publications that would even talk about, you know, Patrick Kelly or Stephen Burrows or like these other Black artists that whose names we have in the record only because the publication decided to do an article on them or a feature on them, right? But another thing that I've been reflecting on too, especially in perhaps a media landscape and a research landscape in which there's often or sometimes this narrative that like Black people weren't in certain positions in fashion or like we've never been there, etc. And what Jet and Ebony have taught me is that like, no, we have always been there. And one example I have of that is, you know, even in thinking about the concept of a Black fashion archive and thinking about what is a Black fashion archivist, right? I'm creating this project. I'm going through Jet and Ebony, and I learn about Lois K. Alexander Lane through this editorial, multi-page editorial that they do on her Black Fashion Museum, which she opened in 1979. So Ebony publishes this article on Lois K. Alexander Lane. We can see her here in one of the images. They published this in 1988. And I'm reading the article, and I learned that Lois K. Alexander Lane goes to graduate school at NYU in the 1960s. And she writes this master's thesis on Black people who worked in retail. And she writes it both because it's a passion and interest of hers, but she also writes it because people are trying to tell her that there were no Black people in history that worked in retail. And she said, absolutely not. I'm going to prove you wrong. And I'm going to embark on what she thought was a thesis, right? That you write over a few years, you publish it, et cetera. And it turned into this years-long project of her creating the Black Fashion Museum. She gets a grant from the National Endowment of Arts, and she's able to travel the country and collect all of these garments, all of these items that really traces Black fashion history. To me, she becomes a North Star, right? Because I'm discovering this after I get a master's degree in fashion studies. I'm starting Black Fashion Archive, and I'm like, wow, I'm affirmed, right? I'm affirmed because we were already here, right? Lois K. Alexander Lane was already here, waiting for me, waiting for all of us, right? To learn about and engage this rich archive that she created that's now at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so if we go to the next slide, one of my pastimes is that I just like scroll through digital archives. It's like really fun. And to all the people attending, there are so many free archives online. Please engage them. They're very exciting. And so I'm scrolling through the National Museum of African American History and Culture's digital archive and come across this dress sewn by Rosa Parks. And I'm like, I have seen this dress before. And again, to reiterate my point about Ebony and Jet being a reference point, I'm like, let me figure out where I remember this dress. And then I go back, sorry to our friend who is switching between slides. We go back to the other slide. I go back to this May 1988 issue, and there it is, right? There's Rosa Parks' dress that she's sewn right there in the bottom corner. It's called out. There's a caption there, and archivists are able to carry through this information, right? They're able to do more research on this dress, maybe a skill set that Rosa Parks had. And so it's this ongoing legacy. And a part of Black Fashion Archive is also about connecting the dots, right? It's also about finding this piece of information, connecting this to this information so that we can continue to index this archive, right? We have the Black Fashion Museum at NMAAHC right now at the Smithsonian, and yet we still need the Black Fashion Archive, right? That huge place that we can go to and continue to engage these items. And so I'm grateful to people like Lois K. Alexander Lane, also grateful to people like Eunice Johnson, right? Who, if we really think creatively, was an archivist in her own right as well. In getting all of these garments, right, from couturiers in Europe, bringing them back, showing them alongside Patrick Kelly and Stephen Burrows. Like, that's the work, right? That's the work, and that's the lineage that we're a part of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Rikki. And then Camille, will you lead us into the next part as we talk more about just the importance and I just get so excited about all of this, right? Just looking at just all of this beautiful imagery, these beautiful Black women. But Camille, please lead us into the next segment.
Absolutely. And so picking up on the heels of Eunice being a trailblazer, not only did Ebony Fashion Fair become so successful and tour the world, but in 1973, Eunice created Fashion Fair Cosmetics. And I was doing a little research and I came across a quote where she stated that she realized that when her models were behind the scenes getting ready for their show, they were mixing so many palettes, becoming little artists and cosmetic chemists themselves. And she realized, I have to make something not only for my models, but for the entire community. And so in me working as a makeup artist for 12 years and a market coordinator, I became so immersed in a wide range of brands, from high-level designer brands to indie brands, and studying a bit more about marketing and cosmetics. Being a trusted steward for so many women in affirming their identity formation practices is not something I take lightly. And so again, I went back to my roots and started diving through Fashion Fair Cosmetics history. And it has been so refreshing and exciting to see advertisements for a range of Black women size, shape, skin tone, hair texture, region, right? And seeing language that was so affirming and positive and speaking directly to us. And so my personal favorite era in beauty history and fashion fair cosmetics is the 80s, where the hair, skin, eyes, lips, everything is on the 10. But we do see some of those beauty remnants carried into the early 90s. And so what I'm lifting up right now is one of my favorite beauty advertisements from one of my favorite beauty models who worked at Fashion Fair in front of the camera. This advertisement was published in Jet magazine, November 5th, 1990. So if we were to transport ourselves back to 1990, this would be hot off the press for us this week. So this is the fashion and beauty look that we would be relishing in and really thinking about beauty explosion. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what marketing was in the beauty industry prior to Fashion Fair, a lot of the language was very demeaning for women. A lot of the language was about making yourself desirable to be chosen by a man, whereas Eunice busts into the scene and makes language and imaging and even posturing of women in positions of leadership, of power, of decision making. And so even down to the model's pose, her power pose, her looking directly into the camera and wearing a garment that is so high level with the emerald jewels to match and the beading, we see that she is part of what is now the beauty explosion of this new collection that they launched. At Black Beauty Archive, we have preserved this full issue magazine, the advertisement, and all of the cosmetics shown in this visual advertisement as well. A personal story, my first role at a department store counter, I was stationed right across the Fashion Fair. And so when I saw Fashion Fair across from me, I was like, this is an opportunity for me to play more as an adult. And it tickles me now because the woman who ran that counter for years would get so frustrated at me because when the new shipments would come in, I was raiding those drawers and calling my clients and putting my millennial clients on to Fashion Fair. And her clients who've been there for decades are coming to the counter like, where is my XYZ, my lipsticks? And so even in my personal relationship, like I was happy to contribute to bringing millennials into what is Fashion Fair as well. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. Now, aside from Fashion Fair creating advertisements for women who are growing as executives, as we saw in the previous slide, or just women in position of power, I think it's also important to acknowledge that Fashion Fair has been so intentional in their language and marketing throughout the decades. And so on the left, we see a Jet magazine advertisement from December 1982 saying, the professionals prefer Fashion Fair's luscious lipsticks. And so I think that's a really powerful strategic marketing move as well, where Eunice is letting everyone know, not only do everyday women utilize our products, executives, mothers, daughters, nieces, but the professionals are using our products as well. And then to the right, we also see an advertisement from 1997 uplifting and empowering women to deep dive into color. In my experience working as a makeup artist, many Black women of deeper skin tones always had conversations with me about feeling like advertisements, and when it came to beauty, that advertisements were trying to say Black women don't wear color. And that's the furthest from the truth. As you can see here, Fashion Fair has been so intentional in showing women of deeper skin tones wearing bold, bright, gorgeous colors. And even the advertisements themselves are empowering women to mix and match and flash and to present themselves in ways that make them feel empowered. I think it's really important to note that even till this day in 2024, I have not seen a makeup brand that has catered to women across multi-generations, multiple ethnic backgrounds, and be able to have them engaged and immersed in those products from teen years late into their maturity. And so for me, Fashion Fair has always been a primary inspiration point in understanding beauty and how to uplift and empower women through language and beauty techniques to allow them to feel seen and see themselves. And so there's no way that we could go through 75 plus years in this short time, but I just wanted to highlight a few of my favorite beauty ads that have moved me and touched my clients as well.
Thank you both so much. You're both such a wealth of knowledge. Um, and I just think about how I'm very jealous of people who know how to apply makeup. That has never been my strong suit. Like for me, my jewelry is my makeup. I put my jewelry on before I put anything else on, right? Then that guides what I'm gonna wear for the day, usually. And, you know, I just think about in terms of like empowerment and how, you know, there are people who put on clothes and then there are people who get dressed, right? There is a difference. And with that, because we talk a lot about, and we have been talking about liberatory practices through beauty, through, you know, fashion, and the ways in which we intentionally are putting forth how it is that we are telling the world that we want to be seen, how, and, you know, like we mentioned before, like by our own terms, right? It's all built into that as a liberatory practice. And it is empowering because of the fact that we are creating, you know, this visual evidence that is documented and will be and is a part of like what is significant within history, in terms of like our own first person documentation. And so, you know, speaking further to documentation, and, you know, highlighting all of, you know, both of your many talents, Rikki, I like for you to talk a bit, if you don't mind. And please don't feel that, you know, you have to stop with this example, but, you know, I'm an archivist, so I was pulling some things out, excavating information on you both, right? Okay, so y'all out there, you just have to know how much I fangirl fan woman over Rikki and Camille. They are just, they're forces as well to be reckoned with. So going back to my question, and like I said, Rikki, you don't have to stop here. It's just an example. But as a publicist, um, can you talk about the impetus for creating Sculpt and how JPC influenced you as the founder, editor, and creative director of this magazine?
Of course, thank you. Also, Skyla, we like fangirl you too. Like, oh my goodness, you're amazing. And thank you for inviting me to reflect on Scope Magazine. It's been a while since someone has asked me about it. So a little bit of background. Scope Magazine, I launched in 2011. I was a sophomore in college at the University of Missouri. I was 19 years old. And it really came out of kind of two intentions and two kind of responses. One, I was surrounded by so many Black creatives in the middle of Missouri who needed a place to express themselves in ways that they felt like they couldn't in the classroom or in Columbia, Missouri, or in their respective locales, wherever they were from. And two, it really was a response to the fact that I'm a first generation college student. A lot of my peers were as well. And we couldn't afford to do unpaid internships to learn about being creative directors and art directors and writers, et cetera, at arts and fashion magazines in major cities. And so between my freshman and sophomore year, I said, I think I'm just gonna start a magazine. I'm just gonna like, we're just gonna become the editor in chiefs. We're just gonna become the creative directors. We're gonna become the art directors. Why not? Who's stopping us? Like, who's stopping us from doing this? Now, unlike John H. Johnson, I did not have that $500 starter loan. I just had a dream, and I had friends who were invested in that dream for their own dreams. And so, literally, we took up different titles based on projections that we had for their careers. I had dreams of becoming an editor in chief. Other folks had dreams of becoming contributing editors at major publications. And we kind of surveyed our network of visual artists, of musicians, literally from across the US, anywhere from like DC, Maryland, St. Louis, Chicago, LA. We just surveyed it and we created a digital publication over the course of months. And we would have launch parties. At a certain point, we had graduated, and I somehow got a nonprofit to agree to give us their not their laptops, their iPads, so that people could like enter the digital space in real time at the launch party. But it was a beautiful experience. It ran from 2011 to around 2015. We covered music festivals like Afropunk. We highlighted photographers like Andre Wagner, who's now like off doing incredible work for major publications. But it really became a space too where, like many of the publications in Johnson Publishing, these folks got their first stories, right? Where people weren't paying attention to them for a variety of reasons. Maybe it was because they were Black artists. Maybe it was because people thought that their portfolios weren't strong enough yet. Maybe it was because, we were all very young. But to me, none of that mattered. What mattered is that we were all doing the work right now. And I wanted to honor that right now. I wanted this to be the first opportunity where people could, in some ways, cut their teeth on what is it like to sit down and do an interview, do a photo shoot, be styled, style the photo shoot. And so it's really exciting. And I think the way that it maps onto Johnson Publishing Company, right, is that it was filling a void. And not only was it filling a void, it was about the people. It was about the people, and it was about bringing together the people in order for us to be able to see ourselves, right, and to hear our voices and to spread our voices as far as wide and wide as we could. And so I'm very grateful to the experience, but also very grateful that you invited me to think about that in relationship to Johnson Publishing.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think that, it is imperative that when we as, Black archivists and historians are talking about the ways in which we came into the work that we do, we also address the fact that we know that there is a space, and, which is what you just said, this void. And in doing so, it is a part of our responsibility, right? Or what we have deemed as our responsibilities. I want to round that back by saying that, because, you know, because of the fact that we recognize the void, then we recognize the fact that we need to address that, and then fill in those gaps, because we do know that, the historical narratives, the overarching narratives, are void of a lot of information when it comes to us. So thank you for pointing that out, Rikki. And then Camille, again, me down my rabbit hole, and looking more into a lot of the work that you do. You talked about how, when you first started out working in makeup, and how it, propelled you into your many, I don't want to say hats that you wear, but your many talents, right? And mastering of those trades. Can you talk about some of your work that's in moving images, like because I think in terms of like the Johnson Publishing Company archive, it's comprised of like 4.5 million or so assets, which also includes, AV materials. And I have to tell you that I did find evidence of Camille Lawrence and Black Beauty Archive in the TV show Riches. So can you talk to us about that, and, just whatever comes from that question?
Absolutely. Thank you for even realizing that. It's funny, being a creative, I feel like we try one medium and then we put it down and we come across something else. And so going from counter to bridal to makeup for politicians and then artists, collaborating in collaboration with the show Amazon on Prime, Riches, that was like such a hidden blessing. 2 years ago, we were contacted by a group in New York City, and they were putting together an exhibition to launch at Art Basel in collaboration with Amazon Riches on Prime. And I said, let me find out what this Riches show is about. And it really blew me back, because I truly feel like the seeds of the inspiration of that show were rooted in the empire that the Johnsons built, right? So the premise of the show is there is a African family and they have a huge beauty empire. And the father suddenly passes, and they're fighting for the rights to maintain ownership and to continue to grow it and expand it. And so even though the show had a bit of drama, the exhibition was really about the heart and soul and connection and relationship to beauty and community. And so there were amazing artists who were featured in the show, their work, their paintings, their portraits, their sculptures. But our ask was to create an archival film. And so for me, it's always about honoring the artist and centering them. And so we had the deep honor and privilege of putting together images to create an archival film. And that was the first time I was like credited as an archival producer in pulling together a team. We did that film in 2 weeks. We pulled together a team of New York creatives. Shout out to Taylor Montague, shout out to Rochelle Brock, shout out to Cassandra Keynes, who really helped me pull that together. And we created like it almost felt like a flip book or a myriad of images throughout different generations across the African diaspora showing our beauty practices. So whether it was a doobie wrap or braids or even the sop in the Congo, really seeing beauty as performance. And that image was able to play on replay on the walls of the actual exhibition, which was really nice and powerful. And so unfortunately, the show didn't get renewed for another season, but I do encourage people to check it out. It still is on Prime, and I definitely guarantee you will see the seeds and threads of the impact on the Johnson Publishing Company even now in, what was it, 2022.
Thank you so much for that. Is there anything else that you two would like to contribute to our conversation before we move into the Q&A with our audience?
I'm just like going to like point to Camille because I'm so excited about the launch of Black Beauty Archive and as another repository and wealth of information that I think is just going to, one, completely just excite so many people, but also just be another resource that Black Fashion Archive gets to engage, right? Yet another digital resource that'll be available to all. And again, so that we can continue to index this work, the work that Camille and I are doing, that Skyla's doing, we are able to like index with the information that we have, but it's because hopefully the people who are attending, you all see those images, you all see something, and you can like send us DMs, message us, email us if you have additional information. I think sometimes people miss the fact that like archiving at its best is a community endeavor, right? And it's really about all of us working together collectively to ensure that the names are in the records, the dates are there, right? And sometimes, everyone sitting at their desk doesn't necessarily have all that information. And so we invite you all to be a part of this work with us. And we're excited too to also learn about all the work that you all are doing out there. And so that we can continue to expand this thing bigger and bigger and bigger so that they know that we've been here and that we will always be here.
Absolutely, Rikki. Thank you for lifting that up. Like, it is so important. I really want people to walk away from this conversation understanding that archiving is a communal practice and it's a practice of care and love, and we can't do it alone in silos. Even though traditionally there may be many archivists across the globe who are working in silos, we're actively working against that practice because we understand that this history is ours and we do have the agency to be good stewards over it. And we want to ensure that the stories that we are telling are accurate and real and they come from us. I think there's something really powerful about pushing back and being in conversation with the communities that we're archiving and documenting, opposed to leaving them out from an ivory tower. Like, that's not the work we do. Myself, Skyla, and Rikki are very intentional about breaking down those barriers to hold space, to be in community. And Rikki, as you were saying, people send you DMs and say, that's my aunt, that's my mother. Same thing. We just got a DM last week from a stylist who said, yeah, I styled that Luster's pink ad, and here's the person on the escrow box, and here's the artist who did this. And it's like, if we're not able to share, we won't know who these people are. And we want to make sure that their names are remembered forever because there are Black people in the future. And we're here today to affirm that. So please stay in community with us and all of the brilliant work that Skyla and Stephen and everyone is doing at the Getty Institute to preserve rich legacies that we build upon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you two so much for that. Okay, so at this point in our program, we are going to move into our Q&A. And the first question that we have here is from Marion Marshall, who asks, who and when was the first Black designer included in the Ebony Fashion Fair show? Excuse me.
So Skyla, we can probably like maybe hopefully double team this, but I think that it's 1958. I'm pretty sure it's 1958 is when we have the first Ebony Fashion Fair around that time. The designers, I'm not sure who were like on the runway, but I do know that I believe it was Frida McKnight who was working with Ebony Fashion Fair with Eunice Johnson and traveling to Europe. And so some of the earliest designers that they're going to see, at least, are Dior, Balmain, Lanvin, all of those kind of European couturiers. But I will do my due diligence and see if I can keep digging to find out because some of the publications from 1958 are saying designer and not necessarily saying exactly who they're wearing and the fashion designer's name. But thank you for that question because now it's going to have me in another rabbit hole.
Right. And I don't have the answer to that question either right now, but there's someone on our team, Tulani Pryor, and this is definitely her wheelhouse. So we will at some point be able to answer that question in more depth. And so our next question is from Felicia Watts, who asks, what advice do you have for anyone looking to pursue the profession of archivist for the Black culture? Part one of the question, as far as education, opportunities, etc. Thank you.
I'll jump in and quickly say, and I always say this statistic, but I'm going to say it again. Less than 5% of professional archivists in the United States identify as Black, but don't get it twisted. We are in community and we are always sharing resources with each other. So I'm going to drop in the chat right now 2 links of 2 organizations that have helped me grow and build communities. One of those is Black Memory Workers Group, spearheaded by Zakia, and also Blacktivist is also spearheaded by one of the co-founders, Stephen Booth. So I encourage you to tap into those 2 as great Black cultural memberships that keep you in relationships with each other. I also encourage you to pursue a degree in library science or get some type of education, even if it's a post-grad degree, and continue to reach out to people. I think that archivists are way more kinder and nice than you may assume. We may be in silos, but we are thirsty and hungry to be in relationships. So I encourage you to connect with archivists you find who know your subject matter and know it well. Connect with them on LinkedIn, send them an email, request time to meet with them virtually, or if they're in your city, show up to their events. And most times when archivists are holding events, our community is in the room with us. So those are the few suggestions I can share.
Rikki, do you have something to add to that?
Camille covered it. I'll keep the conversation going.
Okay, and I just have like one little thing to add to that too, which is that to reach out to archivists who you know, who are working to preserve Black cultural heritage materials to request an information interview. And you know, a lot of us, like Camille said, we're very friendly and open. And I mean, and if we have the capacity, then you know we can address like some of the questions that you may have as you're thinking about entering the field as an archivist. So our next question is from our own Tulani Pryor, who is one of the archivists, one of my fabulous coworkers. And Tulani asks, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm a little nervous. I am so excited for the launch of the Black Beauty Archive. What publications will be featured? Also, can researchers contribute information?
So yes, yes, and yes. There's too many publications for me to actually list. There's over 40 braiding hair magazine publications alone. And I think for the rest of the magazines we have, it's like 70 plus publications. But that's also an interesting, tricky place to navigate because of copyrights and publishing and things of that nature. So what we've done outside of the preservation of those print materials, we've expanded to capture the oral histories of the beauty practitioners who contributed to the ads, preserve the physical cosmetics because beauty is ephemeral. It's almost similar to dance, the way we handle dance in archives. I kind of took that same approach. And so outside of just those print visual things to engage with, there's also accompanying material to tell a fuller narrative and story. And if it's okay with you, Skyla, I feel like I can quickly answer 2 more of these questions in here that are kind of related.
Sure.
So someone asked, hold on. Shout out to my Aunt Lisa. Hey. Denise Sutton, who's an amazing professor at FIT, is asking about the fashion fair ads with the tagline that said, "I'm just a girl from Laurel, soul singer from Detroit." Yeah, so there was a time in the 70s where Fashion Fair Cosmetics did a ton of two-page full ads in Ebony, connecting with everyday women, uplifting celebrities like Nancy Wilson, Diane Carroll, Aretha Franklin, and their tagline was, "I'm just a soul singer from Detroit," or "I'm just a ham who loves to act." And I think that was really brilliant and intentional marketing strategies to say, you may see me in all this glamour, but I'm just a simple woman just like you, or I'm just someone who loves to have a good time. And so I think that's also like the power and confirmation of how Fashion Fair was speaking to all women, no matter if they were celebrities or everyday folks. So yeah, I'm done.
Okay, I'm scrolling through the questions and I'm just gonna stop in where I'm just gonna stop and read this one off. So sorry, they're kind of out of order. Hello, thank you so much for this live giving conversation. So wonderful to hear from all of you. I love fashion fair makeup and grew up with playing with my mom's makeup. We didn't have Ebony magazine, which wasn't one of the Black publications that were in the house. But as I have been searching through Black publications for my artwork, I see so much of a contrast between the articles about Black life and the glamour of fashion fair. Can you talk more about Ebony magazine and the ways that Black fashion has worked with the articles of the good, bad, and mundane aspects of Black life and entertainment in the publication?
That's a good question. And Camille, I wonder if this is a moment where we can kind of bring in a conversation you and I had around some of those tensions that we have within Ebony and Jet when we're going through those publications. So, in preparation for this conversation, as Camille and I were kind of selecting the editorials that we were going to focus on, I brought up to Camille, like, what about the ads that, were sometimes in our current moment, right? We're about like skin lightening, right? And how to appear lighter, or straightening your hair, or wigs that would make you appear more European. And so those tensions are there. And I think our responsibility, right, as historians and archivists is like to both contend with those things, contextualize those things within the moment in which they were put out, and contextualizing that, why they were put out, right? Why that was being marketed specifically to Black women, why publications like Jet and Ebony allowed those advertisements to be in the publication, right? But then I think one thing that Camille can probably speak to as well is, as time goes on, right, we see a different representation. And so there's also, it seems to be at certain moments, the self-correction that's always happening. We don't know yet if it was because there are internal conversations happening at the publication, and that's why things are turning the tide, or just simply kind of trends. We also know that we have Black political movements like civil rights, like Black power, like Black is beautiful, right? Like the Black arts movement, that really also starts to turn aesthetics as well, and really starts to focus on the fact that, like, we can wear our natural hair and still be beautiful, right? We can kind of wear our makeup in certain ways that hasn't been always regarded as beautiful. And also, let's start looking at the ways these publications are taking these aesthetics and appropriating them when they used to actually disregard them and demean us for these certain attributes, right? So I'll hand it over to Camille to talk a little bit more.
No, absolutely. I think it's really beautiful that you raised that. Of course, not everything is rainbow and sunshine. In navigating what was in the past, I think it's important to think of many things, right? This is a Black publication spearheaded by Black folks to touch the depths of our community. And Black is not a monolith, but what has been unfortunately shared experiences is colonization. And with that came a myriad of isms and things that plague us, from colorism, texturism, etc. So in the beginnings, when marketing advertisements were made accessible to different publications, unfortunately, the first things that were being marketed to Black communities were things to align us with respectability politics, straightening the hair, lightening the skin, a fake illusion that if you align yourself in proximity to whiteness, you have more opportunities in life, which we know that is the furthest from the truth. And so unfortunately, we do see that present in some of the advertisements throughout the years. prior to Fashion Fair being born. And so I had mentioned in going through the slides, like even the language was so intentional of what Eunice was doing to speak to the subconscious that you are powerful, you are seen, you are important. And we also unfortunately still see some of the ills of colonization in our communities today. But I do have faith that with the resurgence of new brands, with the resurgence of healing practices, that we can continue to come back to center, to honor and love on each other in the ways in which that have nothing to do with the white gaze. And so that's what I believe Black Fashion Archive and Black Beauty Archive are really about. We are sitting in the center, right? As our foremothers of Toni Morrison and Bell Hooks would put us, like, we are our center. And I think that's why I love Johnson Publishing Company so much, because we have always been the center, and we've been a beauty. And Johnson Publication, I think, has done a brilliant job of holding space for all different types of Black folks to be transparent about their experiences when it came to identity, career growth, where we are in the diaspora, and also looking back. And so we're really excited for the collection to be accessible so that we can have these deeper conversations. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so unfortunately, we were not able to get to everyone's questions, but thank you all so much for contributing your questions to us. I am going to then move us into our closing. And so, you know, I can't say it enough, but thank you, Rikki. Thank you, Camille, for such an inspiring, thoughtful, and brilliant conversation. One that'll no doubt set the tone for what's going to come in our Backstage series here at the Getty Research Institute. Thank you to Linda Johnson Rice for providing me with insight into her mother and her mother's work. And a big shout out to my colleagues, Donna Edgar, Tulani Pryor, and Jacob Wolf, who helped shape my introduction with their research on Ebony Fashion Fair and Fashion Fair cosmetics. For more information on the Johnson Publishing Company archive, please access the link to the Johnson Publishing Company archive resource guide provided in the chat, or at getty.edu. So that's getty.libguides.com/JPC Archive. And also, just so you all know, this recording will be available on the Getty Research Institute YouTube channel. So thank you all again, and this concludes our program.